The Germans mocked the Americans trapped in Bastogne. Snow falls the way ashes fall after a great fire, soft, slow, and strangely peaceful. But nothing in Bastogne is peaceful. Not tonight. Not with the forest groaning under the weight of artillery that never seems to sleep. Inside a half-collapsed barn on the town's edge, Private Daniel Harker presses his back against the frozen wall, feeling the cold creep through his coat and into his bones. His breath rises in white clouds that look like ghosts fleeing his lips. Somewhere outside, boots crunch through snow, the sound carried by the wind like a whispered warning. A German loudspeaker crackles to life. A mocking voice drifts over the trees, syrupy and cruel. "Americans, why don't you surrender? Your Christmas is over. Ours is just beginning." The men around Daniel stiffen. Someone curses under their breath. Someone else pulls their scarf tighter around their mouth. Hunger gnaws, the cold bites, and the shell shock hums like a second heartbeat in every chest. From the darkness, Sergeant Cole mutters, "Let him talk." But his hands tremble around the butt of his rifle. A mortar shell booms in the distance, lighting the sky for a heartbeat, an upside-down sunrise. The glow reveals Bastogne's broken windows, the snapped trees, the foxholes carved like open wounds into the ground. The forest feels alive, watching, breathing frost. Daniel closes his eyes briefly. He thinks of home, the scent of pine on the porch, his mother's handwriting on the last letter he received, the warmth he once took for granted. "Americans." The German voice returns, laughing now. "You are surrounded from all sides. No one is coming for you." The words slice deeper than the cold. Daniel doesn't move, doesn't speak, but he writes a single line in his small, battered notebook with stiff, half-frozen fingers. "If this is the end, I hope it comes fast." The wind howls through the open cracks of the barn, carrying with it the sound of German laughter echoing across the frozen forest. Somewhere far beyond that darkness, an army is marching, and General Patton is about to say the words that will shatter the silence. "Play the ball." The snow swallowed the sound of their footsteps, as if the forest itself wanted to keep their suffering quiet. The night Bastogne became a coffin of ice. The men tried to move anywhere, nowhere, just to remind themselves they were still alive. The roads were buried under snow so deep it hid the dead horses frozen mid-stride, their bodies stiff like statues abandoned by time. Private Daniel Harker trudged behind Sergeant Cole, each step a small rebellion against exhaustion. The cold had a taste now, metallic, bitter, the taste of pennies held too long in the mouth. The wind sliced through their coats like a blade, whispering along the seams, probing for weaknesses. Somewhere in the dark woods, a German patrol jeered through their loudspeaker again. "Americans! How does it feel to freeze in the Ardennes? Are your generals warm tonight?" The laughter that followed was sharp, almost joyful. Cole muttered, "Let 'em laugh. They think they've got us pinned." But a question lingered in the air. Maybe they do. As the column moved, Daniel scribbled inside his notebook. The pages stiff with frost. The world feels smaller each hour. The trees crowd in. The cold chews at our faces. We walk because stopping means dying. Occasionally they passed remnants of earlier battles, burned-out jeeps, shattered helmets, a single glove frozen upright as if still waving for help. Each artifact felt like a warning left by men just minutes ahead of them. A distant rumble trembled through the ground. At first Daniel thought it was thunder. Then came the second rumble, longer, deeper. Artillery. The sky pulsed white again, revealing the men's silhouettes stretched long across the snow. Their shadows looked like soldiers twice their size, marching without fear, the kind of men propaganda posters promised. But the real men were shivering, starving, and praying silently. As another explosion rolled through the night, Daniel leaned his head back and whispered into the frozen air, "If only someone knew we were still fighting." Miles away, beneath a different sky, a general in polished boots was preparing to answer that prayer, and his first words would not be gentle. Morning did not arrive gently. It crashed into Bastogne like a hammer made of ice. At dawn, the shelling finally paused, not out of mercy but out of calculation, an intermission in the Germans' performance of superiority. The silence felt unnatural, too clean, like someone had wiped the world with a cold cloth. Daniel Harker crawled from the barn with the others, brushing frost from his eyelashes. The sky had turned a bruised violet, the kind of color that made shadows look deeper than they were. Smoke curled from shattered rooftops, rising slowly as if reluctant to leave the dying town. Then, through the hush, they heard it again, a German voice drifting from the tree line. soft, taunting, almost friendly. "Americans, are you awake? Enjoy your breakfast of snow." Laughter echoed across the clearing. Sergeant Cole spat into the snow. It froze almost instantly. "They think this is over," he growled. But the mocking wasn't the shock. The men had grown used to the enemy's voice. It had become part of the landscape. Like the cold, the shock came when the Germans fired a single flare into the air. Bright red, hissing, floating above the treetops. Then another. Then another. The sky filled with red lights, drifting down like burning feathers. Cole's breath hitched. That's not an attack signal. They're celebrating. Daniel stared, confused. Celebrating what? Cole swallowed hard. The answer showed itself moments later. Across the snowfield, German soldiers stepped from behind their fortifications, helmets gleaming, coats thick, boots clean. They stood tall, confident. Some even raised tin cups of hot liquid, toasting across the battlefield toward the freezing Americans, mocking them, parading their warmth, displaying the luxury of not being desperate. Daniel felt something twist inside him, a mix of anger and disbelief. He watched steam rise from the Germans' cups and imagined the taste of something warm sliding down his throat. A German officer raised a megaphone and called out in English, "Where is your general now? Has he abandoned you?" The words hung in the air like frost. Daniel clutched his notebook tightly, as if holding it would keep his sanity from slipping away. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, wheels were already turning, engines already roaring, and a voice, Patton's voice, was preparing to cut through this humiliation like a knife. The cold had stopped being a temperature. It had become a presence. By the third day of encirclement, the men of Bastogne no longer flinched at the German loudspeakers. The taunts blended with the wind now, as natural as branches cracking under frost. What struck them more, what carved itself deeper into their bones, were the little daily realizations of just how trapped they were. The first came at dawn, when Daniel opened the last ration tin he carried. It was empty. He stared into it as if food might just appear out of loyalty. The metal smelled faintly of beans, warmth, a memory of nourishment. But the can weighed nothing. A hollow thing for hollow men. Sergeant Cole walked by, his face pale under a crusting of ice. "Nothing left?" he asked. Daniel shook his head. Cole didn't answer. He simply reached into his own coat, pulled out a crust of frozen bread, thin as his patience, and broke it in half. His fingers trembled violently as he handed Daniel the larger piece. Daniel opened his mouth to protest. Cole cut him off. "Eat. Your legs won't carry you if you don't." The bread tasted like cold gravel. But Daniel forced it down, each bite scraping his throat. He felt it settle in his stomach like a stone, not comforting but necessary. All around them, men searched for anything edible. Snow to numb the hunger. Pine needles to chew, just for the illusion of flavor. Someone found a frozen potato in the ruins of a kitchen. They split it 8 ways. Across the tree line, German soldiers lit another fire. The blaze glowed warm, golden, almost festive. Daniel watched a silhouette raise something to his lips. A bowl, maybe. Steam curled upward like a taunt. "Soup," someone whispered. The word itself hurt. Daniel wrote in his notebook with stiff fingers, "The enemy eats. We endure." Then he paused as a tremor of distant engines, low, rolling, unfamiliar, shivered through the frozen earth. He looked up. Cole frowned, listening. For the first time in days, hope felt possible, like a spark beneath the snow. Something was coming. Someone was coming. And from far away, carried faintly on the wind, the world seemed to whisper. Even in war, kindness is a dangerous thing because it reminds you of everything you've lost. The second revelation arrived not through hunger, but through a moment so unexpected it silenced the men more effectively than any German threat. Midday. The sky was a sheet of dull metal. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, settling on torn uniforms and cracked helmets. Daniel and a few others crouched behind a wrecked jeep, sharing warmth through proximity alone, shoulder to shoulder, breath cloud to breath cloud. Then a sound rose from the forest. Not mockery, not gunfire, not the cruel laughter they had grown used to. A harmonica, soft, slow, melancholic. The notes drifted across the snow like a fragile ribbon of memory, winding between trees, slipping into the stillness. It was a German tune. Daniel didn't know the name, but he recognized the feeling. It was the kind of song mothers hummed while stirring soup, the kind of melody that lived in kitchens, not battlefields. The men froze. Sergeant Cole lifted his head slightly. What in God's name? The tune continued, growing clearer. It wasn't taunting. It wasn't triumphant. It was human, wounded, almost pleading. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He wrote in his notebook, "The enemy has lungs, breath, a past. A home. It shouldn't be a shock, but it is." The harmonica faded, swallowed by the wind. But the silence it left was heavier than the music. Corporal Reeves whispered, "Why would they play that? Now?" Cole didn't answer. He stared toward the tree line with an expression Daniel had never seen on him, exhausted confusion. Across the snow, a German soldier appeared briefly between two pines. He wasn't carrying a rifle, just the harmonica. He looked toward the Americans, nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then vanished back into the shadows. No one spoke. The men sat in the cold, their hearts restless, unsure whether to hate the moment or mourn it, because the worst part wasn't the hunger. It was realizing the enemy felt hunger too, loneliness too, fear too. Daniel closed his notebook slowly, whispering into his scarf. This war isn't made of monsters, just men. But the wind had already shifted, carrying, faintly, the growing thunder of engines. Patton's army was moving. Sometimes the smallest glimpse of another world hurts more than a bullet. That afternoon, the clouds cracked open just long enough for a thin blade of sunlight to cut across. Bastogne. It did nothing to warm the men, but it illuminated something none of them expected to see. A scrap of color. Real color, Daniel noticed at first. Half buried in the snow near a collapsed wall lay a small piece of cardboard, bright, perfect red, the kind you'd find on a toy box or a Christmas decoration. It didn't belong in the gray, ruined world around them. "What's that?" Reeves asked, already crawling toward it. Daniel lifted the cardboard from the snow. A child's picture stared back, an American advertisement ripped from a magazine, probably carried by the wind from some abandoned house. A smiling boy held a toy train, sunlight pouring through a window behind him. The caption read, "A brighter holiday starts at home." Daniel felt punched in the chest. Home, warmth, color, three things that no longer existed here. Cole knelt beside him, studying the picture. His face hardened, not with anger, but with something more vulnerable. "That's what it looks like over there," he said quietly. "Back in the States, that's what kids are opening this week." Reeves swallowed. "Feels like a different planet." The men passed the scrap around, each holding it as if it were fragile glass, as if touching it could bring back a life waiting on the other side of the ocean. The picture didn't smell like smoke or blood. It smelled faintly of ink and old paper, civilization. Across the snowy field, the Germans lit another fire. Their laughter carried across the cold, but the men barely heard it now. They were staring at the world they'd left behind, and the world they hoped still existed. Daniel scribbled in his notebook, his handwriting shaking. "We are surrounded by ruins, but the world outside these trees is still whole, still bright, still alive." For a moment, the Americans forgot the cold. For a moment, they remembered what they were fighting to return to. And far beyond the horizon, the engines grew louder, closer, angrier. General Patton was almost here.